All right, so 9.4, we are completing the square, okay? So we're solving quadratic equations. So reminder, right? It's been a while, but solving quadratic equations is what this chapter is all about. We've done it 2 different ways so far. We did it factoring, right? Where we got our 2 sets of parentheses, we used zero product property. And we did it using square roots, where we had x squared on one side, we took the square root of both sides. Right? So that's what we've done. The next way we have is called completing the square. This doesn't work all the time. Okay, it's another one of those where it's a specific situation where it will work, but when it does work, it's actually kind of nice. Okay, so we're gonna learn that today. Tomorrow we will come back and do kind of our catch-all, our one that's going to work no matter what, and that's the quadratic formula. So don't have to worry about it today. We'll do it tomorrow. So today we're still looking at a specific situation. In order to do today, the whole idea behind today's stuff is the perfect square trinomial. And it's been a while since we've done that. But the perfect square trinomial, just as a reminder, was if we did something like this, where it was x plus 3 squared. Okay? And what that got down to was this. Okay, where we squared the first, squared the last, multiplied double. You don't need to know the ins and outs of that right now. Okay? I'm just telling you, this is the reason why we're doing what we're doing today. It's because what I'm going to show you creates a perfect square trinomial. Okay? And that's why we can do it. That's why we are doing it. What you're going to see today is they're going to show you something like this, x squared plus 8x. And they're going to ask you what's going to go here to create that perfect square trinomial. And what number needs to go here. Now, to do this, it's actually pretty easy. Okay, we're going to take that middle term. We're going to take that 8. We're going to divide it by 2. What's 8 divided by 2? 4. And then we're going to square it. Square it, not square root. Square it. 16. 4 squared is 16. So the number that goes there is a positive 16. So we're going to take that middle number, we're going to cut it in half, and we're going to square it. So if we have x squared plus 20x, tell the person next to you what's going to go in that box. Tell them what's going to go there and why. Tell them why.
Andre's like, you decided I want to like.
Okay, raise your hand, tell me what's going to go in there and why here. Aaron? Perfect. Okay, so we cut it in half, we square it, we get here. So let's go x squared minus 16x. Talk somebody. What's it going to be? Why?
I'm so.
Hey, so the question here, we know we're cutting the 16 in half and we're squaring it. The question is it going to be a negative 64 or is it going to be a positive 64? Who's got an answer for me? Fair?
Positive?
Why?
Because you're multiplying 2 negatives by each other.
Exactly. Right? We cut it in half, it's a negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 8 is a positive 64. That number that we have there, that third number that is the one we're trying to find, always going to be positive. Always positive. Okay? That number is always going to be positive. Okay, so we take that number, that middle number, we cut it in half, we square it. We do one more here. Let's go. Without a calculator. Without a calculator. Talk somebody, figure it out. Without a calculator. Do it as a fraction, guys, do it as a fraction.
Think
Do it as a fraction.
No,
We'll allow you to do it as a fraction.
I did so I'll ask. So it's like 7/2.
You get 49.
Times that.
1.75.
Wait, what is there?
Okay, so. Here we go. So we cut that in half. As a fraction, what do we get when we cut that in half? Okay, or 7/2, right? Don't make it a mixed number if you don't have to. Leave it improper. 7 divided by 2 is 7/2. And then if we square that, you're just squaring the 7 and squaring the 2. So what's that fraction over here? 49/4. Because we're taking that 7, we're cutting it in half, right? And then we're squaring it. Square the top, square the bottom, 49/4. So we don't need to just grab the calculator right away on something like that. We can do that in our head. Okay, we can get that fraction in our head. All right, so the next step here. Sorry, first of all, any questions right now on finding that third term? No. Okay, so now, just like I showed you and reminded you of this, we have this now. We need to turn it into that. Okay, so for each one of these, I want you to write what's going to be in those parentheses. There's that one on the far left as an example. Where'd that 3 come from? Talk to me about it. What's in the parentheses? Okay.
So, for which one? For which one? For that one, it is x plus 4. For that one, it is. Yeah. Yeah. No, that one's x minus 8. And then the last one is x plus 3.5. Because it's negative. There's a negative right there. But if you do it, it's negative 16. It's still like negative isn't positive. That number.
X minus 8 squared. And then parentheses x plus 7 squared.
Job.
And then
Kind of guess.
Okay, here we go. Raise your hand, give me the first one. What's in the parentheses here? The first one to. Tristan.
X plus 4.
It is x plus 4. All right, that number right here, guys, that's just that number that we got when we cut that middle number in half. That's all it is. It's that number that we got when we cut it in half. So right here, Tyler,
x plus 10.
x plus 10. Okay? Right here, Phil? X minus 8. It is a minus because this is a minus. Okay, that's the only difference there. Okay? And then our last one here, we just cut that in half, like we said, 7/2. It would just be that. X plus 7. Okay, questions so far? This is the first few questions on your homework right there. Okay, get that third term, change it into parentheses. Everybody good? Okay, so the next thing that we're gonna do with it is now instead of just that, we gotta actually solve an equation. That's what this whole thing's about, right? Is solving an equation. So what we're gonna see is something like this. Let's go, make it not work. So we're gonna use x squared minus 16x equals a negative 15. Okay, so now we're going to solve an equation, right? We got an equal sign. We're going to solve for x. Now, previously, when we had all three terms, right? By all three, I mean an x squared, an x, and a constant. We put everything over to one side. We factor, right? We could do that. We could do that with this one, okay? But some of the ones we see today, we're not going to be able to factor. So I'm going to use this as an example of how to complete the square, how to solve it using completing the square. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep these separated. We're going to keep one side where we have the x squared and the x, and the other side, we're going to leave our constant. So we're taking our constant and putting it on the other side. Okay, so this is the setup that we want every time today. Is the x squared and the x together on one side, the other number, the constant, on the other side, by itself. And then what we're going to do on that left side is we are going to complete the square. We're going to figure out what number should go there, just like we've been doing. In fact, we already did this. Okay? So what number should go in that box? 64, positive 64, right? We cut that in half, we get a negative 8. Square, we get a 64. So that positive 64 should go there, but I can't just randomly add a 64 on one side of an equation. So what do I have to do? I got to do it on both sides. So whatever I added here, I got to add over here as well. So I'm going to add that 64 over here as well. Okay. So I complete the square on the left side. Whatever I added to do that, I got to add to the other side as well. So now I can simplify this a little bit. That next step that we did, right, where we changed it into this with the parentheses squared, we're going to do that. We said that was x minus 8 squared. And on the right side, we can combine those, negative 15 plus 64. What's negative 15 plus 64? 49, thank you. 49. If we need to use a calculator on that, we use a calculator, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'd rather you get it right than get it wrong. Hey, so now we're here. Okay, everybody good getting to this point? Yeah? Okay, because now this is 9.3. We already solved this. We did this using square roots, right? So now we can take the square root of both sides and we can solve it. All this is, guys, is rearranging an equation to allow us to solve using square roots. That's what it is. It's rearranging, changing our equation so that we can solve using square roots. So the square root and the square cancel each other out. So on the left side, I've got x minus 8. On the right side, I got the square root of 49, which we know 7. But since it's in an equation, and we took the square root, plus or minus. Plus or minus that. We're still getting those two answers. And some of us forgot that on the quiz, right? Where you got to get those two answers. You got to take the square or plus minus when it's square root. So then we would split it up into our two. X minus 8 is 7. X minus 8 is negative 7. We're going to solve that. So completing the square is just that extra step there to get it to where we can solve using square roots, like we did in 9th grade. It's just a matter of getting it. So we get there, we add the 8 over. We're going to end up with 15 and 1 as our two answers. Okay, questions on that? Okay. So this one worked out nice and even, right? We had nice whole numbers. Really what that means, guys, is we should have factored this. We could have factored. If we end up with whole numbers, that means we could have factored. We could have added that 15 over and gotten our two parentheses x minus 15, x minus 1, and gotten our two answers. We could have done that, right? So I use this as an example because this works out nice and neat, right? We know it's 7 and all that. Really, when we're completing the square, it's not going to turn out all nice and neat like this. Okay? Sometimes it will today. But in reality, when we're using completing the square to solve something, more likely we're going to end up with some decimals. Okay, so let's take a look at what that's going to look like. Where it doesn't, we can't just take a perfect square. Where it works out a little bit more messy. Okay, so let's go with x squared plus 12x is equal to negative 8. So what I want you to do is I want you to figure out what am I adding to both sides, and I want you to get to this point where we have the parentheses squared equals something, and then stop. Okay, go ahead and do that. Talk to somebody if you need to. Figure out what you're adding, and then get to that next step. Yeah, we're just getting that next step. Okay. Raise your hand and tell me, what are we adding to both sides? What's going in the box here? What are we adding? Zoe? 36. Right? 36 on both sides. So then when we simplify this, in the parentheses is x plus 6. Over here, we got negative 8 plus 36 is 28. So we're here. Okay, everybody good so far? Okay. Yes. So we're still going to take the square root of both sides. Still doing that. So the left side is going to be x plus 6, but the right side, that's not a perfect square. So I'm going to leave it as plus or minus the square root of 28 right now. I'm going to leave it like that for now. Just the square root of 28. Because we still have to split it into our 2. One time it's got to be positive, one time it's got to be negative. So I'm going to split it into the 2. X plus 6 is equal to the square root of 28. And x plus 6 is equal to the negative square root of 28. I'm going to solve it. I'm going to subtract 6 over. I'm going to get those answers. So right now, in your calculator, I want you to type in square root of 28 minus 6. Square root of 28 minus 6. Let's see what we get. It's going to be a decimal. We're going to round it to nearest 100 today. Here's 100. Let's go. So square root of 28 minus 6. You're looking at that on your calculator right now, and you have 4.69. That is incorrect.
I didn't do that.
The reason why it's incorrect, you didn't close the parentheses. When you type that into your calculator, you hit that square root sign, it opens up a set of parentheses. If you just type in 28 minus 6, what's the calculator thinking? The calculator's thinking that that's all over or under the square root. That's not what we want. So you got to close that set of parentheses to tell the calculator that I'm done with the square root. And then minus 6. Okay, try it again. Let's make sure we get the right thing this time. We should end up with a negative 0.71 for that. And then we're going to do the same thing. Just go a negative in front of the square root the second time. So the negative square root of 28, close the parentheses, minus 6, is going to give us negative 11.29. So those would be our two answers. Okay. So yeah, you can see how this becomes a little trickier when it's not a perfect square. because we gotta use that calculator a little bit. We gotta make sure that we've got the right thing for the square root. Okay, so pay attention to that. Any questions on that one? Okay, I got one more of those for you, and then one last thing to tell you, and then we're done. Okay, so I want you to try this one. We're gonna, again, round to the nearest hundred. Let's go x squared minus, sorry, I keep saying minus and writing a plus. X squared plus 2x is equal to 2. Those. Just solve that out. I'm completing the square. And we want to round the nearest 100. Here, round to the nearest 100. Up here, 0.73 and a negative 2.7. And those are rounded answers, so you'll see on big ideas, when they want those rounded answers, they're going to give you x and then that squiggly equal sign. That means we're rounded. If it's going to be an even number, like a whole number, it's just going to say x equals. Okay. So rounding when it's like that. Right. Last thing. I said that this only works in certain situations. Right. The situation in which we can do this is when there's no a value in front of the x squared. Okay, there's no number in front of the x squared. It's just x squared. Okay, that's when we want to do this. There are going to be a couple questions tonight where there is a number in front. Okay, that's going to look like this. It might show you 3x squared minus 24x plus 27, right? Something like that. What can I do to this to make it so that there isn't a number out front? Divide by 3. We can divide everything by 3. Basically taking out a GCF, right? We're dividing everything by that 3. That can get us to here, which allows us then to do what we want to do, okay? If they give us this and they do ask us to complete the square, remember we are splitting that up. So that 9, we would move to the other side and make it the negative. Okay, if we're going to use completing the square to solve that. Always got to be x squared and x on one side, constant on the other. Okay. Any questions about it? Great. Okay. Go ahead, I'll make sure it's unlocked.
My video.
Bye, video.